Hello, Aries. There are people who don't need to speak loudly, but the moment they step into a space, everything around them seems to slow down. Breathing shifts. Eyes begin to observe. The atmosphere grows cautious, even though no one says a word. If you are an Aries, you've probably felt this before, not because you're trying to draw attention, but because your energy carries something primal, an ancient flame, a kind of presence that both attracts people and quietly unsettles them at the same time. It's a power that doesn't need to perform, doesn't need to prove anything, yet it still causes others to adjust their position the moment they stand close to you. This video wasn't created to make you anxious or to make you doubt yourself. It exists to help you understand why, the more mature you become, the calmer you grow, the more honestly you live your truth, the more Aries tends to be noticed, and more importantly, how to hold your inner fire steady without sacrificing your kindness, your faith, or your human dignity. Because real strength never asks you to become cold. It never asks you to become cruel. True strength only asks one thing of you: to know who you are. In astrology, Aries is known as the first fire, the original flame of the Zodiac. This is not a fire meant to burn everything down. It's a fire meant to light paths that have never existed before. Mars, your ruling planet, represents willpower, action, and the instinct to survive. When Mars is young, its energy can be explosive, reactive, easily misunderstood. But when Mars matures, it becomes something very different. Quiet, focused, almost impossible to stop. And it's this transformation that makes people realize you're no longer a flame they can easily control. If something in these words is touching something inside you right now, take a moment to leave a confirmation for yourself. I am ready to stand firmly in my true strength. A comment is not just a sentence. It's a way of aligning yourself with the energy that's guiding you toward the place you truly deserve in life. And when you choose to acknowledge that, you begin to understand something important. Not everyone who notices you is your enemy. Sometimes it's simply the natural reaction of people who aren't ready to stand close to a fire that has already been refined. But to truly understand why the presence of Aries can make others feel cautious, we need to go deeper into the true nature of this flame, because this isn't just a story about personal strength. It's a story about responsibility, about character, about the role of someone who carries guiding energy in a world that desperately needs those brave enough to walk ahead. And that is where we begin next. Aries was never born to wait for the world's permission to exist. From the very first moment of the Zodiac cycle, your energy carried a primal command, a feeling that you must step forward, that you must try, that you must initiate, even when there is no clear road, even when no one is standing behind you, cheering, even when there is no proof that you will be recognized. Astrology calls this first fire. But after more than 20 years of observing charts and real-life journeys of Aries souls, I've come to see it as something deeper, a soul responsibility, the responsibility of the one who goes first. Even knowing that going first means facing doubt, scrutiny, and unkind looks, there is a truth, rarely spoken gently. Society celebrates pioneers after they succeed, but it offers very little grace during their beginning. And Aries, by astrological design, is often placed in that beginning stage, earlier than others. You don't wait until conditions are perfect. You act so that conditions can become possible. That difference makes you a path opener, and also the first one to be watched closely. In over 20 years of astrology work, I've noticed something consistent among truly mature Aries individuals. They're rarely the loudest person in the room. They don't need to overpower anyone to feel worthy. But when they decide to act, the atmosphere shifts. People pay attention, not because you're demanding it, but because you carry a kind of courage that's impossible to ignore. The courage to live truthfully, the courage to choose the road no one else has taken, the courage to accept the cost of not blending in. What unsettles people most about Aries isn't your strength, it's your clarity. You don't live halfway. You don't postpone important decisions just to make others comfortable. And that becomes an uncomfortable mirror for those who've grown used to postponing their own lives. Not everyone dislikes you, but some are afraid that if you go too far, they'll lose the excuse to remain where they are and call it safety. Mars, your ruling planet, is often misunderstood as a symbol of conflict. But in mature astrology, Mars isn't about fighting. It's about the will to live, the instinct to move forward, the ability to act in the presence of fear. When Mars is young, it reacts. When Mars matures, it chooses. It becomes quieter, more centered, almost unstoppable. That's when Aries no longer moves to prove they're right. They move because not moving would be a betrayal of the soul. I've met many Aries. In this transition, they don't come because they're weak. They come because they're tired. Tired of always being the one ahead. Tired of explaining their choices to people not ready to understand. Tired of feeling like every step they take is being watched more closely than anyone else's. And the question that haunts them is simple. Am I doing something wrong? This is a crucial moment in the Aries journey, because if you don't understand the true nature of your fire, you may extinguish it yourself just to feel safe. The deepest human lesson here is this: society needs path openers, but it rarely prepares gratitude for them. Path openers walk alone for a long time. They meet silence before recognition, and not everyone has the inner strength to walk that road. But when Aries learns to stand firmly in solitude without turning bitter, you enter a new level of power, a power that doesn't need to speak, yet still causes others to adjust their position. When standing near you, there's a subtle boundary that mature Aries must learn. The difference between recklessness and conscious courage. Recklessness acts to prove. Conscious courage acts with full awareness of the cost and still chooses to move forward. Once you cross that boundary, your fire stops burning you. It becomes a guiding light, and a guide never drags others forward by force. They simply walk far enough for others to see that a path exists. Maybe you've been judged for doing what others haven't dared. Maybe you've been called too direct, too fast, too different. But ask yourself honestly, if you slowed down just to fit in, would you still be yourself? Not everyone is born with the responsibility to open the way. But if you are Aries, there's a strong chance. This is the role life entrusted to you. It isn't always comfortable, but it matters. If these words are touching something inside you, take a moment to acknowledge that for yourself. I choose to keep walking, even when no one understands yet. You can leave this confirmation in the comments, not to prove anything to anyone else, but so you can hear your own voice more clearly. Because the moment you name your choice, you send a very clear signal to your own life that you are ready to take responsibility for the path you've chosen. Something very interesting happens. When Aries truly accepts the role of the path opener, you no longer feel the need to explain yourself as much. You stop trying to convince people that you're right. You begin to understand that everyone awakens at a different pace, and your responsibility is not to drag them forward faster, but to keep your own fire steady so it doesn't burn out halfway. When you truly understand this, your strength becomes quieter, but much deeper. There may be days when it feels like you're walking alone in silence. But remember this, a seed stays underground for a very long time before it ever breaks the surface. Not everyone who doesn't clap is turning their back on you. Some people are simply watching, learning, waiting until they find the courage to step forward too. And even if no one follows, the path you opened still matters, because it proves that a human being can live honestly with themselves. If this part resonates with you, consider liking and sharing this video, not for the algorithm, but because somewhere out there, another Aries is quietly wondering if they're alone on this road. Your presence could be the reminder that they are not, but the journey of Aries doesn't stop at action or opening paths. This fire carries something even deeper, a quality so subtle that falsehood struggles to survive in your presence. And that's what we're about to explore next. How Aries unintentionally awakens truth, simply by living in alignment with who they truly are. There is a kind of power that not everyone recognizes right away, not even the person who carries it. It isn't the power of action, it isn't decisiveness, or the ability to push forward. It's the power of truth. And for Aries, this power is almost instinctive. You don't learn how to expose truth. You simply live, and truth reveals itself. In astrology, when Mars aligns with the first house, a very raw kind of energy is formed. The first house represents identity, how a person enters the world. Mars represents life force, drive, the instinct to act. When these two meet in Aries, what emerges is not aggression, as many people assume, but a person who finds it very hard to pretend. You may stay silent, you may step back, but living against what you know to be true is nearly impossible for you. Aries doesn't struggle with concealment because of a lack of intelligence, but because your soul was never designed to live two lives at once. And in a world where many people survive by adjusting themselves, by saying one thing and meaning another, by compromising with their own values just to feel safe, your presence becomes disruptive, not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're doing something too right. After more than 20 years, observing charts and listening to the life stories of countless Aries individuals, I've noticed a recurring pattern. Many of the conflicts you experience don't begin with words, they begin with silence. There are moments when you say nothing, yet the person in front of you becomes uneasy. Relationships grow tense, not because you criticize anyone, but because you refuse to participate in unspoken games you don't believe in. You don't need to accuse anyone. You don't need to expose anyone. Simply by living according to your values, what is false becomes uncomfortable. And this is why some people experience you as dangerous, not because you threaten them, but because the truth you carry doesn't allow them to keep avoiding themselves. There's a profound life lesson here, and it's not only for Aries. Truth doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to prove itself. It only needs to exist. But not everyone is strong enough to stand near truth, because truth forces people to face choices they've postponed, emotions they've buried, versions of themselves they no longer want to see. I once told an Aries client in a session, "You are not a mirror meant to flatter others. You are a mirror meant to reflect." And reflection can be uncomfortable, not because you're cold, but because you refuse to blur the image, just so others can feel at ease. Some people don't fear your strength. They fear your honesty, because your honesty exposes what they're hiding, even from themselves. This is why, in many groups, Aries becomes noticeable, even without trying. You might be the quietest one there, yet the energy shifts when you enter. Half-truths feel out of place. Unspoken compromises lose their grip, and those accustomed to living in the gray no longer feel safe. However, this is also where Aries can hurt themselves if they aren't careful, because when you don't understand the nature of this gift, you may believe it's your responsibility to fix everything, to speak up about every wrong, to be the truth teller in every room. But mature astrology doesn't ask that of you. Truth doesn't need you to be a hero. It only asks that you don't betray yourself. One of the greatest lessons Aries must learn is knowing when to be present and when to step back, not out of fear, but out of respect for your own energy. Not everyone is ready for truth, and not every truth needs words. Sometimes your silence, combined with your integrity, is enough for things to rearrange themselves. You may have felt this before. You say nothing, yet others become defensive. You do nothing, yet they start explaining themselves. You don't accuse, yet they feel compelled to justify. This isn't because you intend to harm anyone. It's because your presence activates a question inside them they're not ready to answer. And instead of facing it, They label you a threat. If you've ever noticed that your silence alone makes others uneasy, know this is not your fault, but it's also not an invitation to become harder. It's a reminder to become more refined. The power of truth is not in exposure, but in purity. As Mars matures through different stages, it teaches Aries how to transform this energy from reaction to choice, from eruption to intention, from confrontation to presence. When you stop reacting to subtle accusations, when you stop explaining yourself to those unwilling to understand, you enter a deeper layer of this gift. You become a keeper of truth, not someone who throws it at others. From a human perspective, this is a very real contribution to society. A healthy society doesn't need too many people shouting about truth. It needs people brave enough to live truthfully, so that truth has a place to stand. When Aries matures, you become a quiet moral landmark. You don't teach, you don't judge, but your presence reminds others that it's still possible to live honestly without losing compassion. There may be moments when you feel exhausted from being misunderstood, moments when you wonder if you should soften yourself, be quieter, blend in more, just to make things easier. But ask yourself one honest question. If you have to lose your integrity in order to be accepted, does that acceptance still mean anything? Truth may leave you feeling alone for a while, but it never betrays you in the long run. If these words resonate, take a moment to acknowledge that. You don't need to write much. Just one simple sentence is enough. I choose to live truthfully, even when it isn't easy. When you leave this confirmation, you're not speaking to me, or even to this community. You're speaking to yourself. You're telling yourself that you're ready to step into a more mature version of the strength you carry. And if this message feels meaningful to you, consider liking and sharing this video, not to spread fear, but to spread a value that this time desperately needs. The value of quiet honesty, the value of living truthfully without harming others. Somewhere out there, another Aries is wondering if they're too sensitive, too different, too difficult to belong. Your sharing could be the reminder that they are not wrong. But the journey of Aries doesn't end here. When truth walks alongside an unbreakable will, when honesty is supported by a strong inner core, a new level of power begins to form. This is no longer truth that simply makes others uneasy. This is truth strong enough to change the course of things. And this is where we continue next, as we speak about the third talent of Aries, the one that connects truth with steady action and a will that refuses to break. There is a very quiet kind of strength that only those who've walked far enough eventually recognize. It isn't loud like the first steps. It isn't sharp like freshly revealed truth. It arrives later, after a person has grown tired, has doubted themselves, has wanted to stop, and yet takes one more step anyway. For Aries, this is the unbreakable will. Not a will meant to defeat others, but a will strong enough to ensure you don't abandon yourself halfway through the journey. In astrology, when Mars matures, its energy shifts noticeably. It stops looking for opponents. It stops reacting to provocation. It no longer needs to prove its strength. A mature Mars knows where it's going and isn't distracted by the noise on either side of the road. When this energy expresses itself through Aries, we no longer see a reckless warrior. We see a steady human being, moving slower, but more surely, almost impossible to pull off course. I've met many Aries at this stage of life. They no longer ask how to win. They ask how not to fall. They no longer care about who's right or wrong in an argument. They care about preserving dignity when things don't go as planned. And it's at this point that their will becomes a kind of power that quietly discourages others, not because anyone feels threatened, but because they realize you won't quit, even when no one is standing beside you. Those who try to block Aries often give up in silence, not because they've lost, but because they lack the endurance to keep up. They're used to others reacting, arguing, burning out. But when they encounter a mature Aries, they see none of that. They see a deep stillness, a steady pace, someone who doesn't need to respond in order to keep moving forward. And that lack of reaction renders every tactic of obstruction meaningless. There's a widespread misunderstanding about strength. Many people believe strength means being hard, sharp, willing to harm in order to protect oneself. But that isn't real strength. That's fear reacting. True strength, especially the strength of a mature Aries, doesn't require cruelty. It requires inner ethics, the ethics to know what you're protecting and what is not worth sacrificing your humanity for. The human lesson here is profound. A society only truly progresses when there are people resilient enough to pursue long-term values rather than short-term victories. When Aries reaches this level of energy, you are no longer just the impulsive path opener, nor only the one who exposes truth. You become the keeper of rhythm, the one who proves that a person can remain steadfast without harming others, that you can go far without stepping on anyone. There are seasons in life when Aries feels like walking through fog. No applause, no clear signs that you're on the right path, just lingering exhaustion and a quiet question inside. Should I keep going? This is where the unbreakable will is forged. Not when things are easy, but when you're standing right at the edge of giving up and still choose to take one more step. I often tell Aries in this phase, you don't go far because others are weak. You go far because you refuse to abandon yourself. This difference matters. Those who win by defeating others must keep fighting to hold their position. Those who advance by remaining true to themselves don't need to defend as much. They stand firm because their inner foundation is solid. You may have lived through times when everything seemed to work against you. Your effort went unnoticed. Good intentions were misunderstood. Perseverance was labeled stubbornness. But looking back, it's very likely that those exact periods trained you to stand without constant validation. And that is a rare gift. Not everyone has the courage to keep going when no one is cheering. The unbreakable will of Aries is not blind endurance. It comes with a deep understanding of your own limits. You learn when to pause and rest, when to continue, and when to release what no longer fits your path. Persistence is not stubbornness. Persistence is knowing where you're headed and refusing to let temporary fear make the decision for you. In astrology, a mature Mars is always linked to self-regulation of energy. Aries no longer burns all the fuel. In one explosive push, you learn how to keep the fire, to keep it warm enough to sustain a long journey instead of flaring up and burning out. And it's this steady resilience that makes others both respect and hesitate around you. Not because you're frightening, but because you are not easily shaken. There will be people who test you through delay. Others will test you through doubt. Some will test you by withdrawing support at the exact moment you need it most. But an unbreakable will is not born to fight each of those tests. It is born to move through all of them at a pace that only you understand is right for you. And when others realize that you won't stop just because they stop believing, they begin to grow tired. Not because you've done anything to them, but because they can no longer control the rhythm of your movement. If you're listening to these words and they reflect a very real chapter of your life, take a moment to ask yourself one honest question. What helped you stay standing during your hardest season? Not to take credit, but to recognize that you are far stronger than you once believed. You may share that answer in the comments if you feel called, not to compare yourself to anyone else, but to honor your own journey. And if this part resonates with you, consider liking and sharing this video, not to spread an image of a hardened Aries, but to spread a message the world deeply needs right now. That true strength doesn't need to be loud, that a person can be resilient and still remain kind, that an unbreakable will is not meant for constant battle, but for finishing the path you chose with integrity. However, this same endurance brings a new challenge. When you are strong enough to go far, you also risk becoming an energy source for others. If you don't learn how to protect yourself, not everyone deserves access to the fire you are holding, and not every battle is worthy of your participation. This is where Aries must learn a different kind of wisdom, the wisdom of protecting energy, of choosing presence carefully, of knowing when to stand still instead of pushing forward. And this is the next doorway we open as we talk about how Aries learns to protect themselves without dimming their light. There is a very specific phase in Aries maturation when you begin to realize that not every gaze directed at you comes with harmful intent, but not every gaze is support either. And it is this gray space that tires the heart more than any open confrontation ever could. In astrology, the 7th house and the 12th house are deeply subtle spaces. The 7th house speaks of those across from us, direct relationships, visible opponents. But the 12th house goes much deeper. It is the realm of the collective unconscious, unnamed fears, unhealed wounds, and shadow aspects people refuse to acknowledge within themselves. When Aries reaches maturity, these two houses begin to influence you in a very different way. You may feel targeted scrutinized, placed into uncomfortable situations. You never initiated. But what hurts most is not open conflict. What hurts most is being misunderstood, being seen as a threat, when all you are trying to do is live true to who you are. There is a truth, both gentle and difficult to accept. Not everyone wants to harm you. Some people simply don't have enough inner light to stand close to yours. Your light, even unintentionally, touches parts of them they are trying to hide. And when someone isn't ready to face their own shadow, their natural reaction is to defend themselves. Not because you are wrong, but because you've caused them to glimpse something they aren't ready to see. I've met many Aries. At this stage, they come with different stories, but the same questions. Why do I only want peace, yet keep ending up in tense relationships? Why do I do nothing wrong, yet still feel misunderstood? Why does living more honestly feel lonelier than before? The answer is never simple, but it always circles one truth. When you step fully into your light, you no longer fit into unhealed darkness around you. The 12th house is not the house of evil. It is the house of collective fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of not being enough, fear of being seen too clearly. When Aries carries direct, honest energy and lives in alignment, you unintentionally activate those fears in others. They may not know how to name what they feel. They only know that when you're near, something inside them feels unsettled, and instead of turning inward to heal, they turn outward and assign you the role of disruptor. This is where your greatest lesson begins. Not everyone who targets you is your enemy. Some are simply fighting themselves, and you've become the mirror, reflecting that struggle. If you treat every suspicious glance as an attack, you will live in constant defense. But when you learn to distinguish real threat from another person's fear, you enter a very deep level of spiritual maturity. The human value of this lesson is not becoming more guarded. It's becoming more understanding. Understanding that people react not only to actions, but to emotions they haven't named. Understanding that envy, distance, suspicion are often symptoms of an injured inner world. And understanding that, while you are not responsible for healing everyone, you also don't need to turn every difficult relationship into a battlefield. There's a sentence I often share with Aries. Learning this lesson, you don't need to dim your fire so others aren't blinded. You only need to learn where to place it. This is not advice to shrink yourself. It's a reminder to choose the right space for your light. Not every place needs strong fire, and not everyone is ready for it. There are relationships you must step away from, not out of resentment, but out of difference in awareness. There are conversations you must stop, not because you're right and they're wrong, but because you are speaking from two different levels of consciousness. When you understand this, you stop needing to prove your innocence. You stop over-explaining. You begin protecting your energy with softness and strength. A mature Aries doesn't become cold. You become selective. You understand that not everyone deserves access to your inner space, and that is not selfish. That is self-respect. That is how you protect your fire from being consumed by unnecessary battles. You may have felt guilt after walking away from someone. You may have blamed yourself, thinking that if you were softer, more patient, things might have worked out. But be honest with yourself. Some relationships don't end because you weren't good enough. They end because you outgrew the space, and staying longer would have only prolonged the harm. When you learn to see others through understanding instead of judgment, something quietly miraculous happens. You stop fearing being targeted. You stop reacting sharply to unkind glances. You begin to see clearly what is real danger and what is simply the echo of collective fear. And within that clarity, you find a deep calm. If these words make your heart soften, even just a little, it may be because you've lived as the misunderstood one, because you've wondered if you were too sensitive, too different. But trust this, deep perception is not a weakness. It only needs to be guided by wisdom, and that wisdom comes from learning how to set boundaries without closing your heart. You may want to ask yourself one very honest question. How are you learning to protect your own energy? Not by building higher walls, but by choosing where you step in. Not by doubting everyone, but by trusting the intuition you've already refined. When you can answer that question, you are standing very close to the highest level of Aries strength. If you feel called, you may share your answer in the comments, not to explain yourself, but to acknowledge your own journey of growth. And if these words feel meaningful, consider sharing this video. Somewhere out there, another Aries feels targeted, isolated, placed into unwanted confrontation. Your sharing could be a gentle reminder that they are not alone, and that they are not wrong for choosing to live truthfully. Because this is the moment when Aries begins to step into the highest level of power. No longer the power of action, no longer the power of truth alone, but the power of emotional intelligence, the ability to clearly distinguish between light and shadow, between what must be protected and what must be released. From here on, your journey is no longer about fighting the world. It's about learning how to stand firmly within it without losing yourself. There comes a very quiet moment in every Aries life when you realize you no longer want to win, not because you've grown weaker, but because you are finally strong enough to stop proving it. That moment often arrives after many trials, after being misunderstood, scrutinized, placed into opposition again and again. And in that silence, a different kind of strength begins to form, the strength of leadership, rooted in character, not fear. In astrology, when Mars, the planet of action and will, harmonizes with a mature sun, the symbol of an illuminated self, a very rare kind of leader emerges. Not someone who commands, not someone who controls, but someone so grounded within themselves that others feel safe, simply standing nearby, a moral leader, a human being whose influence doesn't come from external power, but from inner consistency. Aries was never born to dominate. This is something many people misunderstand about you. Your strength was never meant to push others down. It was meant to lift others up, to give courage to those who may not yet believe. They can give it to themselves. As Aries matures, you no longer need others to fear you. You begin to care more about whether your presence helps others grow stronger. I've seen many Aries enter this phase with a very strange feeling, relief and emptiness. At the same time, relief because you no longer have to strain, emptiness because old motivations no longer satisfy you. You no longer want to win at any cost. You lose interest in battles for position or recognition. Instead, a deeper question arises. What should my strength be used for? This is where the greatest social lesson of Aries appears. The world doesn't lack strong people. It doesn't lack those who intimidate, control, or manipulate. What the world lacks are strong people who remain kind, strong without harming, strong without dimming the light of others. And when Aries reaches this level, you become one of the few. Something very subtle happens. When you lead through character, you don't need to speak much. You don't need to prove anything. Yet people begin to watch you more closely, not because they fear you, but because they want to understand you. They want to know what keeps you steady when everything is chaotic, what allows you to remain calm when there are countless reasons to react. And that curiosity is the sign that your influence has moved to a different level. There is a sentence I often share with Aries who have reached this place. When you no longer need anyone to fear you, you become someone they choose to trust, not out of obligation, but willingly, because they sense you will not abuse your strength, because you've proven, by the way you live, that power does not need to be paired with fear. Leading through character also brings a serious responsibility. Responsibility for your words, for your actions, for the influence you carry, whether intentional or not. A mature Aries understands that every decision affects more than just themselves. It shapes those who are quietly watching, learning, following by example, and this awareness makes you more careful, more thoughtful, and more compassionate. Perhaps in the past, you led through instinct, by charging ahead, by leading through action. But at this level, you lead through presence. You don't always need to be on the front line. Sometimes your integrity during the hardest moments becomes the greatest lesson. People watch how you face loss, failure, injustice, and they learn how to stand for themselves. The most beautiful thing about this level of power is that you no longer feel alone, not because there are more people around you, but because you are no longer at war with yourself. You no longer need to prove your worth. You know who you are, and from that grounded place, You offer courage naturally, not through advice, but through living. You may have noticed moments when people come to you, not to ask what to do, but to ask what you think. They seek your perspective, your discernment. That is a clear sign. You are becoming a moral anchor, not because you are perfect, but because you are willing to take responsibility, even for imperfect choices. If listening to this brings a gentle stillness to your heart, it may be because you are ready for the next question. What do you want? To use your strength, to protect, not to defeat anyone, but to preserve something meaningful, family, truth, those more vulnerable, or simply your right to live authentically. You may share that answer in the comments if you wish. Not to perform, but to confirm, because when you name what you are protecting, you clarify exactly how you will use your power in the next chapter of your life. And that is a very quiet, very real act of leadership. If this part touched you, consider sharing this video, not to glorify an idealized leader, but to spread a value our society urgently needs. Strength paired with kindness, power rooted in ethics. Somewhere out there, another Aries is confused by their own strength, afraid that being powerful means hurting others. Your sharing may remind them they don't have to choose. They can be both, strong and compassionate. And finally, after all these layers of strength have been revealed, there is one last confirmation, meant only for you, not from the world, not from any title, but from yourself, that you are ready to stand in your power without losing your heart, that you choose to lead through character, through integrity, through courage refined by experience. And when you make that choice, your journey doesn't just change your life. It quietly reshapes those who walk behind you. Aries, you are not dangerous. You are simply not easy to control. And that is what unsettles people. Not because you've done something wrong, but because you don't bow to what no longer aligns with your conscience. You don't know how to shrink yourself, to make others comfortable. You don't know how to hide your inner fire, just to blend in. You live honestly, and in a world where so many survive by becoming someone else, that honesty stands out. You are noticed because you are real. You are targeted because you refuse to bow, but you are respected when you preserve your humanity. This matters because when you look back, you'll see that your hardest seasons were never when you were weak. They were when you refused to become what once hurt you. You had the strength to retaliate, to harden, to grow cold, but you didn't choose that path. You chose integrity, even when it made you lonelier, slower, more misunderstood. There may be moments when you feel watched, eyes from unexpected places, caution from those once close, and you wonder if you're doing something wrong. Listen carefully, not for comfort, but for clarity. If you feel watched, it's not because you're wrong. It's because you're standing where not everyone dares to stand. That place isn't glamorous. It isn't always applauded. But it's where people must live according to their values, because there's nowhere left to hide. And you've stood there long enough to understand this. True strength is not controlling others. It's refusing to let circumstances distort who you are. A mature Aries no longer needs to prove strength. You've lived through enough to know that power doesn't shout. It shows itself in keeping your word, in not turning away from what's right, in choosing kindness, even when no one demands it. And that creates a different kind of authority, one that doesn't scare, but cannot be dismissed. If you've stayed until now, it may be because part of this story feels like you. Perhaps you've been misunderstood. Perhaps you've had to hold yourself together to avoid being pulled into what doesn't belong to you. If this is your season, allow yourself a moment of confirmation. No announcement, no declaration, just one clear sentence, spoken inward. If you are ready to stand firmly in your own fire, leave this confirmation. I choose strength, guided by integrity. This isn't just a sentence. It's a way of living, choosing not to impose, not to wound, not to make others smaller, but to use everything you've lived through to become someone others can trust, even when they disagree with you. And if this message matters to you, like and share this video, not to prove anything, but to spread a needed energy, the energy of strong hearts that refuse to harden. Somewhere, another Aries is tired of being targeted, misunderstood, placed into roles they never asked for. Your sharing may remind them they are not alone, and that their path, though difficult, is not wrong. And this journey isn't over. After everything you've learned about strength, truth, will, and character, there remains one more quiet ability waiting to be named. An ability that doesn't require words, doesn't require stepping forward, yet still has the power to change everything simply by being present at the right moment. In the next video, we will speak about that ability, a very quiet power of Aries, one that doesn't speak much, yet makes the world listen.